Hello, welcome back again. Welcome to How to RPG, and yes, I'm covering Dungeons and Dragons 5e. Yes, it will be complex combat mechanics. For those of you who are unfamiliar with my channel, I am not doing exclusive. I don't cover just 5e now, but I am doing this because I need a little bit of break from trying to learn new systems, getting things organized, so I'm doing this. So don't think that I will be going and shifting back to just covering 5e exclusively. This is an exception, okay? I'll do one next week as well, and then that'll be it for a while. Anyway, my suggestion is to take part in the poll. I've put up a poll. Feel free to take part in that poll. How's it going, Fred Hubber? Fred Hubber is a patron. Thanks for being here. Grab some food, some drink. Make sure you're comfortable. I have a slideshow presentation. I will be doing some demonstration with the maps and miniatures and the dice in front of you so that you can see how it's done. I'll answer whatever questions that you have, and that will take place straight after the presentation. Okay, I think it's time to get into it, don't you? I know it is. Hi, welcome to How to RPG. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons 5e. That's right, this is the rules around Dungeons and Dragons 5e. This is lesson plan 3. Okay, and this covers complex combat mechanics. The game rules that you are possibly struggling with that are a little bit more complicated than some of the other rules out there, I'm going to be covering them today. I'm going to break this down. I have already covered many of the combat mechanic rules that exist, so the intention is to cover the ones I haven't already done. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the hide action as an action. Okay, hiding as an action in combat. What is the ready action in a battle or a combat? Like, what does it look like? How does it work? How does grappling work in a fight? What makes shove different from the grapple or some other attacks? Cover. There are 3 different types. I will cover each of those 3 different types. We'll be talking about death saving throws for characters, and I will probably also talk about death saving throws for monsters, NPCs, characters that are not controlled by the players, but by the dungeon master or game master. And then we'll be doing some miscellaneous recommendations, because I always do this. So the intention today is, my objectives, is to explain everything as clearly as possible, demonstrate that process, so there will be demonstration after the presentation, and allow practice. So I can't really do that quite the way I would like, but I will certainly answer questions. That's what I want to do. Okay, so let's get straight into the first one on our list, and that is the hide action. Now, hiding is what you do when you don't want to be noticed by somebody, when you want to be hidden from other things going on around you. So, hide requires you use your main action as your character or your monster so that you can be unseen from a foe or your enemy. Now, to do this, you need to make a stealth check. Okay? Anytime you want to hide behind something or hide in something, you're going to be making a stealth check or a dexterity check. Very, very simple. How do we do this? You take your stealth score, that modifier or bonus, and you add it to a 20-sided dice roll. If you don't really have a stealth proficiency that you're adding, you can just use your dexterity modifier and add that to a 20-sided dice roll. It is then compared against the creature or the enemy's perception. Now, whether you're using passive perception or whether you're using an active perception check where you roll a dice, it really doesn't matter. That's how it works. That's what you're trying to do. Okay? So a contest is a little bit different in that when you're using a contest, whatever you're trying to get, it must be higher than the enemy's perception check. Even if you're using passive perception, you must get higher to be hidden. So you can't get equal to, okay? You must get greater than. And this is one of the most confusing aspects for a lot of people when playing the game, since everything generally is get equal to or greater than to succeed. And in this case, it's not. So I understand your confusion if you don't get it. Okay, so that is the hide action. Now, the hide action can be taken by other classes and characters depending on their abilities. There are something like a goblin can perform the hide action using a thing called nimble escape. And to do so, it's using its bonus action rather than its main action. The rogue, for example, at level 2, gets cunning action, and then with its cunning action, it can use the hide action as a bonus action. It's built into those particular types of monsters and characters very specifically because they need them. Okay, to be effective, they need them. But those are the exceptions. Normally, it's your main action. Okay, so that is your hide action. And yes, you can take the hide action in a battle. Yes, it does not guarantee that you will not be found by another creature. You can certainly be discovered by another creature when you take the hide action. If you walk behind a wall and they see you walk behind the wall, just because you can't be seen behind the wall doesn't mean that they don't know that you're behind the wall. They can walk around and follow you behind the wall. So it just means that right now you're hidden. Okay, but they might still know where you are. Ready. The ready action. The ready action, probably one of the most frustrating actions out there. There's a lot of confusion around it. So the ready action requires you use your main action as your character or your monster, and it's going to be using your reaction as well. So you only usually get one action, main action, in a round, certainly on your turn, unless you have a special feature, which is I think the only one I can think of right now is something like Action Surge. But it actually goes into play as a reaction, and it takes place on somebody else's turn normally. Okay, so what you're trying to do is ready an action to do whatever it is, and you have to stipulate a trigger so that the action or movement can be used, okay, before the start of your next turn. So if you get back to your turn and you're taking your turn again, you've lost whatever you were trying to do with your ready action. So you have to complete. It has to be triggered within that round, okay, that you're playing through, because by the time you get back to your next turn, you lose it. Now, what can you ready? Well, you can ready a spell. You can ready to cast a spell. You can ready to make an attack, whether that's a ranged attack with a bow or swing your sword. You can ready an action to dash. You can ready an action to do a lot of different things. This is where it gets a little complicated, because a lot of times I see people do this and they assume that a ready action means that if I have multi-attack, then I can make multiple attacks as a ready action. And unfortunately, no, that's not how it works. I mean, maybe it should, but that's not how it works. You do have a disadvantage by using a ready action. The benefit is that if you do not have a target to fire at, or you're waiting for somebody to do something that's hostile, you can use a ready action to take your turn when they do something that is provocative. Okay, all right, so that gives you an idea of how the ready action is. I am assuming people will have more questions about the ready action, and that's perfectly fine. Okay, grapple. Okay, grabbing and grappling. Grappling is always been difficult in Dungeons & Dragons. It's got slightly better with Dungeons & Dragons 5e, but grapple is a special type of melee or close quarter attack that stops a creature moving if it is successful. Like, you can stop a creature from moving their position if you manage to grapple them. It is a contest between whoever's trying to perform the grapple. So if you're trying to engage or grab somebody applying a grapple, you're going to make a strength or athletics check. Okay, and it must succeed against the target creature's strength athletics check, or they can use dexterity acrobatics for their check. And that's to resist the hold. So the problem with a contest of this type, again, is whenever you make your strength athletics check, whichever one you decide to use, it must be greater than the opponent's or target creature's strength athletics check or dexterity acrobatics check. It cannot be equal to, okay? Equal to and greater than doesn't apply here. This is a contest. When you're using a contest, you must always get greater than. You cannot get equal to. You must get greater than. Otherwise, nothing's going to change in the situation. Now, the great thing about a grapple check is if you have more than one attack that you can make, you can substitute one of those attacks with a grapple. If you have 3 attacks, you could substitute all 3 of those attacks with a grapple if you wanted to. That means you could attempt to grapple 3 times if you really wanted to and you thought you needed to do so. If you have 4 attacks, you could use all of those as grapples. Your problem is that you must have at least one hand free to do so, and grapple is not like and I think this is probably bad wording. It probably should be called grab rather than grappling. It does not mean that the person can't do anything. So if you grab somebody or grapple somebody, it doesn't mean that they can't actually maneuver and attack back. They can. They only have disadvantage. And all you're doing is restricting their movement. That's what it's designed in the game to do. Okay, so that is your grapple and how that works. Some creatures can perform a grapple as a bonus action. Some creatures will perform it as a standard action or a main action, but you can substitute one of your attacks with a grapple if you needed to, and that's perfectly fine, completely legit. All right, so that's grapple. Next, shove. Shove falls into the same sort of bracket as the grapple, and that is, it is a special melee attack that knocks a creature prone if you choose to knock them prone and you are successful, or you can push that creature back 5 feet away from you. Okay, you don't pull them, but you can push them. You're pushing them in some direction, okay, away from you. It is a contest. It is performed exactly the same as the grapple. You have to make a strength athletics check, okay, and succeed against the target creature's strength athletics check or dexterity acrobatics check to resist the force. What you'll notice is I'm always stipulating you must use strength athletics to use the shove or the grapple. You cannot use dexterity acrobatics to actually apply the shove or the grapple. To resist it, you can use either strength athletics or dexterity acrobatics. But to actually apply a shove or a grapple, you must always use strength athletics. Now, it's very useful because if you can push somebody prone, okay, that means that anybody who comes up to them and they're within 5 foot can make an attack against them with a melee weapon, and they have advantage, which is why you want to do that. If you want to push them into a fire, you would use shove, okay, if there's a fire behind them. If you want to shove them off the edge of a cliff, shove is a very useful feature. One of the things about shove, just like grapple, is that if you are going to use it and you have more than one attack, so maybe you have 2 attacks, one of those attacks can be replaced with a shove. In fact, if you have 2 attacks, you can try to shove some 2 different creatures because you have 2 attacks. You can substitute both of your attacks to shove. You could take one as a shove and one as a grapple. That's perfectly fine too, against separate targets. But of course, you'll need to be successful to be able to shove or grapple them. Shove is a very useful feature. It also means that if you have a character who has a very high athletics check or modifier, a very high modifier for athletics or a high modifier for strength, you are at a huge advantage. There are some restrictions, like if you want to grapple or shove a creature and you're medium size, you can do so against a large creature, but if you go any higher or any bigger than large, you can't do it. You can only affect a creature one size larger than you. So if you're a small creature, you can affect a medium creature, but not a large creature. If you're medium size, you can affect a large creature, but not a huge creature or anything larger than that. Okay, so now let's do cover. Cover is one of those roles in Dungeons & Dragons 5e that a lot of people ignore for various reasons. One, because it doesn't really fall into the concept of Dungeons & Dragons 5e. It's really weird in that it uses numerical modifiers rather than advantage and disadvantage. So let me cover this. There are 3 different types of cover. Cover, when you're using cover, you're trying to make an attack, whether it's going to hit you with a ranged weapon or possibly a melee weapon, although that doesn't really apply very often with a melee weapon, but it could, or a spell. It makes you more difficult to actually target with that hit or that spell. So whether that's a character played by either players or a monster or an NPC run by the dungeon master or game master, it doesn't matter. You're trying to make yourself more difficult to hit. What this does is it increases your armor class. So if you have half cover, where half of the character is covered, then you get a +2 bonus to your armor class. And you also get a +2 bonus to your dexterity saving throws. So it affects dexterity saving throws and armor class for half cover. What is half cover? A low-lying wall would be potentially half cover. Half cover might be represented by being in a tree that's covered in foliage, providing half cover where there's branches and leaves in the way that might actually affect something trying to hit you. Then there's 3/4 cover. This is where 3/4 of your body, okay, 3/4 of your body or the character or the monster is being covered up. And you get a +5 bonus to your armor class and a +5 bonus to your dexterity saving throw. Now, what would be an example of 3/4 cover? Well, something like a arrow slit has a very narrow space that might potentially provide 3/4 cover. These are things that often are determined by a game master or dungeon master. A water that comes up to and covers most of your body except for maybe your head would be considered 3/4 cover. So it's going to be determined by how much of your body is covered. And if you are in something that is sort of like trees and foliage, does it seem appropriate to use that as cover as well? I will also point out that if you are hiding behind a medium-sized creature and you're medium-sized yourself, they would provide half cover. That's +2 bonus to your armor class. So try not to stand behind somebody if you want to actually connect with another creature on the other side, okay? But if you want to use them as cover, kind of handy because it does actually provide you with some cover. There are no friendly fire rules in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. That would be a house rule, so you don't need to worry about hitting your allies if you're hiding behind an ally. Okay. All right, next. Should I say not hiding, but using your allies as cover. Now, total cover means the creature can't be targeted by an attack, whether that is a melee attack or a ranged attack. They have total cover, or by spells, unless the area effect is involved and it goes around total cover. Total cover basically means you cannot be seen. If you cannot be seen, you cannot be targeted. Okay, and it's the best type of cover to have. So if you can find that type of cover, use it by all means. Now, I have usually a lot of people ask me questions about cover, and I am happy to answer those questions. So just prepare them, chuck them into the chat right now if you need to. Okay. Dexterity, death saving throws. When you reach 0 hit points in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, it doesn't mean you're dead. Not necessarily. You might be dead, but not necessarily. So how does the death saving throw work? Well, the first thing to understand is a death saving throw is only performed, okay, at the start of a character's turn or when it actually occurs when they drop to 0 hit points. Now, when you drop to 0 hit points, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are dead. But if your maximum hit points, okay, if you wind up with a single blow striking you, and it would reduce you to minus your maximum hit points. So if you had 10 hit points and you're reduced to, say, -10 by the blow, even though we don't track negatives in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, that would instantly kill you. So even though you've dropped below 0 hit points, or to 0 hit points, the blow is instantly going to kill you. Okay, so there is no death saving throw in this case. But if you have, say, 10 hit points and you are reduced to by 11 hit points, so you drop to -1, which is basically 0, that isn't actually minus your maximum hit points that you've been dropped to. So in this case, you're dying, but you are not dead yet. You're going to get to roll a 20-sided dice. There is no modifier attached to a death saving throw. You simply roll a 20-sided dice. You perform this at the start of the character's turn, okay? And if you roll a 10 or higher, this will count as a successful roll, okay? If you roll a 9 or less, this is counted as a failure. To make it worse, if you roll a 1, okay, which is obviously 9 or less, but if you roll a 1 on your 20-sided dice, this will be counted as 2 failures, not 1 failure. If you roll a 20, a natural 20, on your death saving throw, instead of it just being a success, it is going to give you 1 hit point back. You regain 1 hit point. Instead of being on 0 hit points, you are now on 1 hit point. You are now conscious and able to take your turn if you want to. And a very sensible thing to do when this happens is to stand up and be ready to do whatever you need to do, whether that be run away or attack. Okay, now we've just talked about successes and failures. What does this ultimately mean? It means that you have to accumulate a certain number of successful death saving throws. So if you get 3 consecutive, okay, not consecutive, forget about that, 3 cumulative successful death saving throws, you are stabilized. You're still on 0 hit points, but you no longer are dying. You are just going to wake up in about 1d4 hours, unless somebody heals you with some sort of magic. Okay? So that's for a character. But if you get 3 cumulative failures, the result is your character will die. That's it. No more death saving throws, you are dead. Okay, right. Now, you're probably thinking, well, what if I get a successful save and then I get a fail on my next roll? Well, it's cumulative. The idea is you try to get 3 successful saves before you wind up with 3 failures. You don't want to get 3 failures before 3 successes. Three successes means your character is probably going to live. Yes, it will. And if you get 3 failures before you get 3 successes, then your character dies. That's how it works. There are other things that can affect a death saving throw. So if you take more damage, that would be counted as a failure. If somebody does a critical hit on you, it counts as 2 failures, and so forth. If you take way too much damage all at once, that could potentially instantly kill you as well. So there's a lot of things that sort of affect the death saving throw. The idea behind the death saving throw is to keep your character in the fight as long as possible, so that the players don't have to bring in a new character quite so often, and also to help still engage them in the process of a battle, even though they can't do very much. Since most battles take between 1 and 3 rounds, this works out reasonably well, although it probably isn't absolutely necessary. Now, you're probably asking yourself, like, okay, hang on, there's a death saving throw for player characters. What about the monsters? Do they get them? Well, no, they don't. Unless the game master or dungeon master stipulates that this monster or character is so important and special, then they don't get a death saving throw. Okay? But if your monster is just a standard mook, then basically when they reach 0 hit points, those die. But if you have a specialized character or a specialized NPC or monster and they reach 0 hit points, you can have them make death saving throws if you wanted to. It does add a level of complexity for the game master and the dungeon master to adjudicate, so it's really up to you whether you want to do that or not. Remember, game masters, there are always more monsters, and players, remember, there are always new characters. And just because a character dies does not mean the character can't be played again, because we're playing often in a fantasy world where there is magic, and magic can bring characters back to life quite often. Okay, so that's the death saving throw. Okay, I always do some miscellaneous recommendations when I talk about Dungeons and Dragons or any kind of role-playing game, and these are my recommendations to you. When you're unsure what to do in a complex combat situation where your players are trying to do multiple unusual things, maybe jump onto a dragon and stab it through the back with their sword or something like that, and then try and hang on while it's flying around. Look at the action they're trying to do, get them to describe what they're trying to do, and then determine whether it needs to have an ability check involved, a skill check, an attack roll, a saving throw. Which one would work better in this situation? Okay, decide on which one. Will there need to be more than one roll take place? Is a roll even required? Otherwise, if you don't think there's any chance of failure from whatever the action is in battle, then allow automatic success. And if you think that whatever they're trying to do is utterly ridiculous and simply impossible to achieve, then simply apply automatic failure. That's the easiest way to deal with that situation. And that's my advice to you when you're running your game. Now, I'm sure you have more questions, and if you do, I will be around to answer them. I'm hoping this was useful to you, and if it was, fantastic. I want to thank my patrons who support me on Patreon so that I can run these types of programs each week, and I will be back next week to cover magic mechanics for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. I want to thank you for watching and listening. Hopefully you got something from it, and hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Okay, hello. Give me a second while I drink some water, and I will do some demonstration in a second, by all means. But first, let's go through the chat and see what people have in terms of questions. Or if they have no questions or some feedback, we'll go through that and then we'll go from there. I've been talking straight for almost half an hour. Cool, blimey. All right. Let's see. Let's have a look at our chat and our poll. Do you have questions about Dungeons and Dragons 5e? Yes. Okay. All right. 20%. Not sure. 10%. Okay. Just watching. 50%. Wow. Thank you. Those of you who are so dedicated to watch my stuff when it really probably doesn't affect you that much. And no, 20%. Okay, cool. So those people who do have questions, put your questions into the chat. Okay. Let's go here. Hashtag. Let's go here. Write your questions now. Okay, let's have a look. I'll go through the chat and see what people have to say. Big Kid is a patron and also a moderator. Thank you for being here. I always forget to add cover bonuses unless it's something like an arrow slit. So Big Kid, I wouldn't feel bad about that. If you're running your game and you're not really applying cover rules, I mean, you might say, well, it's the tactics of using cover are now lost. Well, that's not really true, Big Kid, because even if you aren't using half cover and 3/4 cover, you're probably still applying total cover. Okay, when they can't see the target, they can't actually hit it. So you're still probably using some of the cover rules, just not all of them. And this seemed to be the case with most people. I know when I first started out with Dungeons and Dragons 5e, I did not use the cover rules, which some of the players got a little bit upset about. And I said, well, because I've got a lot to deal with. There's 7 of you and there's 1 of me. And you're all learning to play the game and you want me to answer questions. I can't process that much information all at once. And that does not indicate to players or other game masters, I'll make it quite clear, just because you are not using all of the game rules does not mean you are a bad game master or bad dungeon master, or that you should go and get somebody else to do it or find somebody else to do it, and that you shouldn't be engaged in doing it. Nonsense. No, not at all. Just do it the way that works for you. There are plenty of people who have been playing Dungeons and Dragons 5e for years, and they have never used cover rules other than total cover. That's it. Because if you can't see it, you can't target it. Okay? All right. Now, do you apply cover in congested areas like hallways? So in other words, what you mean is if you have, I suppose, I can do a quick demonstration of that. Let's demonstrate that on the battle grid so you guys understand what he's talking about. Okay, I have a wizard. I want to cast a spell. And to cast the spell, right now I've got a rogue, cleric, and my barbarian here, and they're standing behind them, and they want to shoot one of the goblins, maybe one of the goblins in the front here. Yep. But if I decide to use something like Firebolt or Ray of Frost, well, there's cover involved because I've got to shoot past somebody. So yes, I would. And I usually tell players when they're doing this, look, if you want to get a clean shot, you have to move out, because you can split your movement in Dungeons and Dragons 5e as part of combat. You can split your movement. I would say you have to move out to be able to target without having to worry about cover. So move. 1, 2. Now you can hit this one. There's nothing in the way. There's nobody in the way. There's no cover involved. Now you can make your Firebolt attack or your Ray of Frost attack, and you can still hit them. Piece of cake. And then when you're finished, if you still want to make sure that you can't be targeted, you can go back here. That means too that if a goblin decides to use a bow, or we have a spellcaster back here using a ranged spell, your front line is providing cover to your wizard. They would get a +2 to their armor class because you have to shoot past them. Remember, if you're a medium-sized creature dealing with a medium-sized creature in the front, okay, they're going to be providing cover for you. Okay, all right, so that's hopefully that question. So I do apply it, but as I said, I haven't always applied cover rules all the time, particularly when I started out. Okay, next question on the line here. Big hit you got here. If you natural 20 a death saving throw, does a normal turn ensue? Like, do you get an action? Okay, so big kid, I think I answered this question, but let me answer the question again. I'm going to go back to the battle grid, so that's probably going to be the easiest way to deal with this. Okay, so you dropped, you're down, okay? And as I said, at the beginning of your turn, you roll a 20-sided dice. So you roll your 20-sided dice and you get a 20. A 20 is a success, but it's a special type of success. Okay, because it's been your fighter's been dropped by one of the goblins, but you've had to make a death saving throw at the beginning of your turn before you do everything else. That's what you do, and I get a 20. Now I have 1 hit point. Okay, my barbarian has 1 hit point. I can now get up. I have my movement. I have my action. I have my bonus action, and I have a reaction which I can take during that round. Okay, you can't take a reaction when you are unconscious. But once you're conscious and on 1 hit point, you can. So the first thing that I would do as the fighter is I would get up, use half my movement. I would then maneuver myself into whichever position I think I need to be in. So maybe I move myself around here if I want, since I'm only on 1 hit point. And then I can make my attack. Now, if I have 1 attack that I can make with my action, then I'll make 1 attack. If I have 2 attacks as part of my action, then I'll make 2 attacks if I have something like extra attack, and I'll roll those and roll damage. So you can absolutely take a movement, a bonus action, an action, and a reaction, because the death saving throw is the very first thing you have to do on your turn. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. Okay. I've got that one wrong before myself, so don't feel bad if you've been doing it differently. I can assure you that if you don't read the rules very, very carefully, it's very easy to miss these things. Anyway, what do you got here, Fred? Fred Hubbard is also a patron. I think I mentioned that before, but if you don't place furniture or scatter terrain for your players to hide their figure behind, they tend to assume that a blank room map has no furnishings. That's right. So if you're drawing out your map and you don't draw in terrain, then they don't know that there is terrain to hide behind. If you are using maps and miniatures and your map has got terrain features on it, just like I just showed you before with the big block there, right, that provided some cover, not total cover, but some cover, then they know where they can position themselves. If your map is not supposed to be representative of their environment completely, then please cross it out or indicate to them that these aren't actually terrain features if you're repurposing a map, because it can confuse people. If you're using terrain, it's very easy because you can see, okay, there's something here. The Dungeon Master's literally put a big box here, or a bed, or a chair, or a wall here, so that must be cover. So there must be some sort of benefit, particularly if they're using cover rules. Does that make sense? Okay, thanks for pointing that out, Fred Hubbard. Very good. Derp is also a patron. What have you got here? Without enemies beating on unconscious characters, is it difficult for a PC to die? Okay. It is difficult for a player character to die in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. But I'm going to make it very, very clear that, it depends on what level you're at. It is much easier for a level 1 and level 2 player character to die in the game. It is much harder for a level 5 character to die in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. It is even more difficult for a level 20 player character to die in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Now, most of you will never be playing up to level 20 anyway. I have game mastered up to that level, and I've played up to level 16 as a player character, and it's very difficult for very high level characters to die because they have so many hit points. But yes, it is. If you compare Dungeons & Dragons 5e to older versions of the game where you had fewer hit points, and when you reach 0 hit points you were dead, certainly it is harder for a player character to die in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. But there are very easy fixes to that. If you want to make it work differently, you simply remove the death saving rules from Dungeons & Dragons 5e. And you remove the instant death rules from Dungeons & Dragons 5e. So as soon as you hit 0 hit points, the character's dead. and you've got it there. Or you decide, I don't want to have character death, I just want them knocked out. So that means that no player character ever dies. They are simply knocked out, and maybe it works like fate. So yeah. I know. I think where you're going here with this derp is because I know a lot of players get very upset when their character is down and dying, and then the game master has the monsters or the enemies come up to their character and beat on them while they're down, which basically means every time they hit, that is another failed death saving throw, moving them closer and closer to death. So I guess let's represent this as we'll take the rogue, because that's more fun for me. I can beat up on the rogue. So if we have basically you've got a bunch of goblins that have moved in on a downed character, and if each one is striking that goblin, they don't even have to do that much damage. They could do 1 point of damage as long as they hit. And unfortunately, because it's a melee attack and they're up close, it actually counts as two failures, not one failure. So beating up and taking down a character who's down is very easy. It is probably the most efficient way and effective way for a game master or dungeon master to actually kill a character in a battle. And look, I think it needs to be on the cards. It's always a possibility. It makes sense that the goblins would do this. It just doesn't feel good when it happens to you. Okay, that's it. So yeah, I think that's where you were trying to go with that, Derp. Let me know if you're, how you run your games is really up to you and your group. I personally don't really care. I'm just here to answer rules right now, and provide recommendations. Anyway, Derp. I had a game with a reborn paladin. Death saves were +4 with advantage. Yes, so there are ways of getting a bonus to your death saving throw. So for those of you who are like, oh, how do I get a bonus to a death saving throw when there is no a way to get a death saving throw bonus? Well, there are some different features that might do this. Like, for example, if you have an orc and an orc goes down, an orc player character, you're not necessarily going to die. There is a mechanic that might allow you to actually not die and avoid this. If you have something like the bless spell cast on you, it makes sense that you would be able to use the bless spell on you, because as long as the bless spell is still active, it is still affecting your character. So what does that mean? That means that you would get to roll a 4-sided dice as well as your 20-sided dice with the bless spell cast on you. Which is one of the reasons why, because remember, bless affects your attack rolls. You get a d4 to add to your 20-sided dice, but you also get to any death saving throw, and guess what? To any saving throw, should I say. And a death saving throw is a saving throw. It's just a very special type. So you can then add a 4-sided dice roll to that if you wanted to. So bless would allow you to do that. Okay. So there are ways of getting bonuses there, but they're very, very specific. Usually you don't get bonuses. Okay. But there's another reason why, that if you have the bless spell, probably the first spell you want to cast is bless. Okay, ensures your characters have a better chance of getting up if they go down, also a better chance of resisting any kind of saving throw they have to make, and better chance of hitting the target. Yeah, okay, Fred. 55% success per death saving roll. So average is by roll 5. They have success 3. I'm not sure what that means, Fred. Okay, but anyway, as long as the players are forgetting to use cover, I conventionally forget to use them for creatures. The balances, so if you're not using cover for the player characters and you're not using it for the creatures, it does balance itself out, so it's not a big deal. Okay, Pale Rider. Do we have a campy cannon drill attack option? No, we don't, as far as I know, but you could make one if you wanted to. Your game, not mine. Your game, you can make it. Do it if you need to. Anyway, yes, that's right. Getting up from prone in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, it uses half your movement. If you're playing Dungeons & Dragons 4e, it's all of your movement. but you're not playing Dungeons & Dragons 4e, you're playing Dungeons & Dragons 5e if you're watching this, I would imagine. And if you're not and you're playing something else, then it'll work differently again. So yes, half your movement is used up. So if you have 30 feet of movement or 6 squares of movement, if you're using a grid, then you use up 15 feet of your movement to stand up, or you use 3 squares, okay, if you have a speed of 6 squares. Okay, very, very simple. So absolutely. I was not aware of death saves working like that. I always learn new things. So yeah, look, again, Big Kid, I made that mistake early on myself, and yeah, running a YouTube channel does help you figure out stuff as you go. Pale Rider, and people say 5e is simplified. No, it's not. So for those of you who think that Dungeons & Dragons 5e is simplified, it is most certainly not a simplified rule system. It simply appears to be Dungeons & Dragons 5e is simpler to play than Dungeons & Dragons 4e. 4e is much more complicated and confusing to play, with many more rules and many more modifiers than Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, again, is much more complicated than Dungeons & Dragons 5e, okay, with all the modifiers and so forth. Now, something like Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition, so Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition, has a lot of different modifiers that you can apply to the game. It is also a very complicated system compared to Dungeons & Dragons 5e. But if we roll back the clock and you go back and you play basic Dungeons & Dragons, or Back Me Dungeons & Dragons, then I would say I've played Back Me Basic Dungeons & Dragons and will be playing it tomorrow on Wally DM's channel. I can assure you that system is simpler and easier to understand. It is just different. There are some differences to it. Okay, some differences that can sort of throw you a bit. They certainly threw me. But ultimately, at its ground level, it is a simpler system than 5e. So 5e is not the simplest system. It is just simpler than 4e, Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, some of the different versions of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and it is probably simpler than Pathfinder, because Pathfinder is based off 3.5. Okay, all right, moving on. Next, I had a player throw a fit between his PC, actually took damage, 4 hit points out of his 60. Okay, yeah, people do. What else are we supposed to say about that? Well, look, however you want to run your table. As I said, I've said before, how you run your table is up to you, not me. Anyway, Satori. Hello, Satori. How are you? I finally got to your comments. Let's see. They should endeavor the player. Monsters are not here to play. They love the taste of flesh. Okay, I kind of get where you're going with that one. Seems like the combat is a hot mess, but to each their own. Look, I would say, look, I would prefer a game that has less mechanics at its core rather than more. And to each their own. Some people like complexity, some people don't like it. I prefer less, but that's just me. Anyway, time for a shower. Okay, I'll see you later. I have had a low int and low wisdom creature zombie each eat a PC they downed. Well, it would make sense. That's what zombies want to do. They kill and then they feed, right? Well, maybe that's how zombies work in your world. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some demonstration. I think brains. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a quick break. It's not quite top of the hour. And then I will come back and I will demonstrate using the maps and miniatures each of these different concepts, so that it's very, very clear what's going on, because it's all very well explaining things, having slideshow and little pictures and so forth. That's all nice, but it's not necessarily getting you exactly what you want. So I'm going to endeavor to demonstrate this a little bit more in a second, and if you just need to give me 5 minutes just to go take a toilet break, I will do that. So let me just type in here hashtag in 5 minutes we'll do a demonstration. So Explaining, yes, but demonstration. I've promised demonstration, so I will do demonstration. Okay, give me 5 minutes or less. Arnold will look after you, and when I get back, we will do it. Oh, okay, almost ready. Another drink of water. Okay, I think we're just about ready. Okay, I'm here. I'm back. So demonstration time. I promised demonstration, so that's what I will do. We'll go through each of the concepts that I just talked about. I'll do it. What do you got here? How does moving with a grappled creature work? If a creature grapples a creature on its right side, can it drag the creature to its left? If so, how much movement? Okay, so first of all, if you are able to grab or grapple a creature, you can move half your speed. That's how it works. So you can grab them and grapple them. And I think what you were trying to describe is, I'll demonstrate. I suppose that's going to be the easiest way. So I'll do a demonstration when we get to grapple about how that might look in terms of dragging, and you'll let me know if I didn't answer that part of it, Derp. Okay. So yes, you can, and look, you can drag them whichever way you want to go. I have always come to the conclusion that when it comes to grabbing a creature, it's probably sensible to allow 3 points of movement: left, right, or straight back. Whereas pushing would be pushing them backwards, and so we'll leave that for the shove action. Does that make sense? But yeah, I'll demonstrate. I do have some videos that do this. They only see this rule when you move. You can drag or carry the grappled creature with you, but your speed is halved unless the creature is two more sizes smaller than you, but isn't sufficient. Right, exactly. Not necessarily. You can drag them to the left, to the right, or straight back. Yeah. It's just, I would say, restrict the movement going backwards against the creature for the shove action. grappled move. If the creature is one size smaller or larger, half speed dragging. Yeah, exactly. Satori, question. I constantly ask my players if their turn during combat is over. That implies that I don't understand the number of actions a player has. Is there a tip for me to avoid asking each time? No, not really. One of the things that I find really helpful, though, Satori, and I get your question, is if you know they've already taken a action, a bonus action, they've done some talking, they've done some movement, they're not necessarily going to get their reaction, because a reaction is taking place on somebody else's turn, usually by a trigger. You can say, well, their turn is over. Okay, so once they do that, you say, right, your turn's over, we're moving on. That's what I would do, because I'm usually counting the actions they perform. Some special features, it's not quite clear whether it's a bonus action, an action, or it requires no action, whether it's a free action, because there's also an interaction, right? You can also perform an interaction, one free interaction per turn or round. And so there's a lot of things to count up. But I don't think there's a problem with that. I would say to you is it's probably really good if you can train your players to do this. When you've finished your turn, please let me know. So you said, okay, I'm going to move up to the goblin. I'm going to swing my sword twice because I have 2 attacks. I roll my dice and my damage all together. I'd let the dungeon master know, and I say, okay, and I say, suck on this, goblin. I've finished my turn. If you get your players to indicate when they've finished their turn, then you don't have to ask them. That doesn't mean that players will do that, though. I can assure you. It's nice if they did. I do this myself because I am a game master and I'm aware that it's very useful and helpful to me to indicate this. Like, okay, I've done what I wanted to do on my turn. I'm finished. Deal with the next person. And I have a few people in my group who operate the same way. Some people kind of forget this and they just assume stuff. But it's very helpful when players say, I've finished my turn. Fred Hubbard, too smaller than you do weight check, larger you aren't moving it. Okay, I'm not sure what that means, all Fred. Okay, let's get on to demonstration, because that's why we were here. Okay, if that answered your question, Satori, hopefully it did. I really do hope it did. Let's start off with the big mess. Right now, I'm going to tell you that the hide action and perception are one of the hardest mechanics in the game to deal with. By far the worst sort of thing to contend with. It's always been a problem. It always will be a problem. And it's always confusing. Okay? So do never feel bad when you can't sort of figure out what the heck is going on. So let's do the hide action. And I will demonstrate and explain this process to you. So we'll put this up here so you can see what we're dealing with. Okay, there's the hide action. So here's our layout, here's our characters. And whether it's the first round or not, you've got your goblins here, and say your wizard decides they want to hide as an action. They use their action into hide. Where can they hide? They have to find something that provides enough cover to actually hide in. Now, the forest here is probably something they could hide in. Yep. So to do so, on their turn, they do this. Okay, I'm going to use my movement. I'm going to move into the trees, okay, however far I need to. I've done that. I'm also going to make my stealth or my hide check, okay? It's a dexterity check. In this case, my dexterity's not huge, but I do have a 2. Okay, so that's great. We've got a 2. And I roll a 20-sided dice. That's fine. We roll a 20-sided dice, and I add my 2 to my 8. I get 10. That's my hide check, okay? That's my stealth or dexterity check to hide from the goblins. Now, the goblins saw me go into the bushes, but if I'm successful, they cannot see me. That's it. That's how it works. What do I compare it against? Well, usually your game master, if you're using passive perception, will use passive perception of a goblin. A goblin's passive perception is a 9. So I would succeed. I got greater than. I can't get equal to. I must get greater than to be able to hide. But that's fine. I've done that. I've achieved it. I've hidden. Now that you've done your turn, you've done your main action, okay, you've got no bonus action to do anything with, that's fine, you've moved, You don't worry about doing an interaction. You're not going to talk because that would be stupid if you're trying to hide in the bushes. What can the Dungeon Master do? Well, let's move this out of the way for a second. Well, I can move up when I have my Game Master's turn. I can move up and I can engage this cleric here. I could come over here and attack the fighter with a couple of these goblins. Maybe this one comes up. So we've got a front line. Maybe this one comes over here. But the orc saw the wizard go into the bushes and knows that the wizard is hiding there and knows that a wizard on the battlefield is dangerous and says, "You gobbies, go over there. Go find that wizard. He's in the bushes." So what can the goblins do? They don't know exactly where the wizard is. They only saw the point at where it entered the forest. So they can still go 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 and move again and start moving into the forest to try to find the wizard. Now, as soon as you're right in the face of the wizard, your cover really doesn't work anymore, okay? Even though you're in the cover, you succeeded, they can still chase you down if they want to, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, okay? So they can still move and try to get to you if they wanted to. But if you're the sort of game master who's like, well, okay, I have 3 targets rather than 4 targets, then that's how it would work. All that hiding in combat is really supposed to do is either present you as a less likely target, make it difficult for somebody else to actually see you. Okay, if you can't be seen, difficult. You probably will not hear somebody. I know a lot of people say, but you can hear them. If you're hiding in a battle, you can hear them. If you've ever been in a real battle where there were no swords involved and you were just punching and kicking somebody, you would know that actually hearing somebody is very difficult. Even if they move into some bushes, being able to hear them move around with all the other noise that's going on is difficult. Just imagine clanging weapons made of steel banging against each other. Even more difficult to actually figure out where they are. Much, much more difficult. So don't assume that just because you can't see them, you should be able to hear them. Because if you look at older versions of Dungeons and Dragons, advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and even in some cases basic Dungeons and Dragons, you will notice that it does point out that you can't really hear the position of somebody in a battle because a battle creates too much noise and you can't hear their movement normally because of the generate, the ambient, the noise generated from clanging shields and blades against each other. It doesn't work. And of course the exploding fireballs and magic missiles and firebolts that are taking place. Now, it is not spelled out in the Dungeons and Dragons 5e rules. It, like many things, the reason why you have a game master or dungeon master is because a game master and a dungeon master can adjudicate what the rules cannot cover. And so you need a game master to be able to do that, and you need to allow them to be able to make decisions about that sort of thing. Otherwise, it's really, really difficult to run a game in a battle. The hide action has always been notorious. And I will cover another part of the hide action because this always comes up, and that is the rogue. I know people get very, very upset about the fact that the rogue has a bonus action and they can hide, and they think this is unfair and they should not be able to do something like this because it just makes no sense whatsoever. And so I'm going to cover that in a second. So let's do that. Let's reset our situation, and we're still covering hide, but I'll talk about what a rogue is able to do. And we are specifically not talking about a first level rogue, because a first level rogue has got the same problem that the wizard does. Exactly the same problem. The difference is with a rogue is that at level 2 you have cunning action, and it allows you to hide as a bonus action rather than as your main action. So let's do that now. Let's move this back here, and we'll put our wizard back in the front line. So the thing is with a rogue, if your rogue is the sort of character who gets up close and fights it out, great. you don't usually have to worry about your sneak attack. This is usually the biggest problem in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, because the rogue is trying to figure out, how do I get sneak attack? Well, I can just engage one of these goblins that were within 5 feet of my allies, and because of that, I will get my sneak attack. I won't get advantage, though, but I would get my sneak attack damage, which is exactly what I want, right? That's what I want. But if I want to have advantage, and I want to get my sneak attack, I need to be unseen, okay? And I need to have advantage on that attack roll. And since I've only got one attack as a rogue, because you don't get extra attack unless you multiclass, I really want to have advantage on that attack roll. Otherwise, the chances are I might miss. So what do? Second level rogue, please people, this is what we're talking about here. So on your turn, you do the following. You move into the bushes. But you can still see out, but the bushes are still providing you with some sort of cover. In other words, there's enough cover generated by these bushes to allow you to hide in them. And so you use your bonus action, your cunning action as a bonus action, and you take the hide action. Now, usually if you're a rogue, you're probably going to be proficient at level 2. So that means you get a proficiency bonus of 2, and you get your dexterity modifier, because dexterity is related to that, right? And it's, in this case, this rogue has got a 3. So I know that my stealth modifier is a 5. So I roll my check, but here's the thing. I don't get advantage, I'm just rolling it, okay? So I rolled a 3. So a 3 and a 3 is 6, plus a 2 is 8. Here's the thing. Right now, okay, you would be comparing that to the passive perception or a perception check for the characters here, for the monsters, for your goblins. Will they know that the rogue has moved into here? Mechanically, it works like this. I've got a 9. My 8 is not greater than the 9. Getting a 9 against the 9 for the passive perception of the goblin is not enough. You must get greater than. Okay. But if I rolled again on a different turn, this time I got a 5. So I have 5, 3, and 2. There's my modifier. Okay. There's my proficiency at level 2. There's my dexterity modifier. There's my dice roll. I got a 10 this time. Well, that is greater than the 9 that the goblin has. So right now it means that a passive check compared would mean that I'm hidden. Okay? That's it. I've managed to hide during battle. Now that I have taken the hide action, I can't be seen. And as I just discussed before, really hearing a creature in a battle really means very little, because the battles are so noisy, you probably won't be able to hear them unless they've got, bells attached to them and they're wandering around with a great huge lot of pots and pans on their back, which they're probably not doing, okay, if you're a rogue. So that's fine, that works. Here's another little quirk to this. Now that I've hidden, I still have my main action left, so I can make an attack, which is exactly what I wanted. So for my attack, as it happens, I probably get my proficiency bonus if I've been using a short bow, and my dexterity modifier is probably a 3, so I'm just rolling a 20-sided dice roll, but I don't just roll one of those 20-sided dice, because as soon as if you're hidden or hiding, or you're unseen by a creature, okay, unseen means that you get advantage on your attack against them, because they can't see it. So I get to roll 2 of these. Wonderful. So I get a 9, not too bad, and I get a 2. Okay. So I ditch the 2 because it's advantage. I take the highest number, which is the 9. I add my 5, it comes to 14. Then I compare it to the armor class. The armor class of these goblins is a 15. So I don't hit. Didn't work in this case. But the point is that I did manage to get advantage on my attack. That's how I do it, by being unseen. Yeah, there are other ways of getting advantage. There's about 50 different ways of getting advantage in the game. So if I rolled on another attack and I've already hidden, okay, or taken the hide action, I got a 13, I got a 19. So I ditch the 13, I take the higher number. So 19 and the 5 is 24. Well, that's equal to or greater than the armor class of the goblins who got a 15. So I can definitely make my attack a hit, and I get my sneak attack damage, and I increase my chance of success. This starts at level 2 and goes up. Why does a rogue operate this way? It's because the rogue has so few attacks. Okay, remember, multiclassing is supposed to be optional. You apply multiclassing only if you think it's something you want in your game. By applying multiclassing to your game and the rogue, being able to multiclass into something like fighter rogue, you will change the dynamics of the game. Okay, if you consider it the standard, then it's going to be a problem for you. But if you're adjusting everything, and if you're using multiclassing or feats, you should be adjusting your game. If you're not, you probably don't need to. Remember, the rogue only gets 1 attack, so rolling 2 dice shouldn't be a big deal. Sneak attack, again, is only on 1 attack. Yes, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but if you're trying to compare your rogue against something like the fighter, it's not really too much of a big deal. It really isn't. The intention of the game is to allow the rogue to do this. In older versions of Dungeons and Dragons, being able to hide did not necessarily mean that you had to be hidden or hiding in the shadows or unseen. It was just you have figured out how to get at a weak point on the enemy, so you can make your backstab, as it was called. In this case, 5e calls it the oh gosh, sorry people, I need some water. I'm talking a lot. 5e calls it sneak attack. It used to be called backstab. Backstab is just a progression of this. So there are plenty of times when a game master could adjudicate and say, well, you can have your sneak attack because you're sneaking up behind them if you're using facing rules. 5e doesn't use facing rules, but you could apply that to your game if you wanted to. So yes, that's how the rogue is supposed to operate, which means that once you've made your attack, you give away your location. They now know that the arrow came from this part of the bushes when it fires out. Okay, we know where you are. But if you've still got some movement left, you can continue to move, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're hidden, even if you're moving through the cover. Okay? Because you haven't actually taken the hide action. It is trying to just mechanically represent hiding, hidden, using stealth, moving in shadows in 5e. That's all it is. Okay? There's a lot of nuance behind it. Okay. All right. What do you got here, Fred? There must be a place to hide. Yes, you must have something you can hide in. Being invisible makes that process a lot easier. If you're invisible, you can't be seen, so you get advantage on your attack no matter what if you're invisible. Okay? An endless flat plane with no objects, just the PC and the enemy. There's nowhere to hide. Yeah, you need to have something to hide in. If you don't have something to hide in, it won't work. Absolutely, I agree. And it makes sense. The rules stipulate this. Pretty simple. Okay, next. So now we've done the hide action, let's move on to the next thing on our list, which is the ready action. The ready action is probably one of the most annoying actions in the game. Why is that? Well, ultimately because there are so many things that you can ready. and it's a little hard to sort of cover everything, but I'll do my best. So let me grab this and cover the ready action. How are we doing for time? We're doing all right on time. That's good. Okay, ready. Okay, let's put that up there. Shove this back in there. Okay, cool. All right, I think we've got it in the right place. You know what we're dealing with? We're dealing with ready action. Okay. So one of the biggest hassles with the game is knowing what to do with your ready to action. And often we use a ready to action for a couple of different things. And I've mentioned this before. So let's move these goblins back. We won't engage them just yet. So for example, a ready to action, you're using your main action, which means you're not going to necessarily be using your main action to attack anymore. It might wind up being triggered as an attack, but you might be able to ready any sort of thing. As I said, a ready to action can be anything from using your action to do a variety of different things or to move. Okay, those things are all possible. They're all there on the cards. I know a question that does tend to come up is, can I ready a bonus action? I don't think that there's anything particularly wrong with readying a bonus action. I think it would be perfectly fine. Bonus actions are a weaker version of the action. But you only get to do one of those things. When you ready an action, you're not readying your entire turn. That means that whatever you trigger doesn't give you your movement, your action, your bonus action, and an interaction, and a chance to talk as well. You're only getting to do something very, very quickly as an interrupting action. That's what a readied action is trying to do. So you're using your main action, and you're going to use it as a readied action. So what can I do? So I could ready an action on my turn if I wanted to. And my readied action is to flee if the goblins attack. And as soon as they attack, I will run away. As soon as they look like they're going to attack, I'm going to just run away. That's what my readied action is. Okay, that could be one of the things that I ready. I might decide that if I see them attack, I will run at them. Okay, all right. So they try to move forward. Okay, as soon as that starts to happen, the readied action that the fighter takes is to run straight at them. Okay, maybe that's what you do. Maybe you decide, okay, actually what I want to do is if they look like they're hostile, I will fly away. And if I have the ability to fly, then I can just fly away. Okay, or fly over the top of them to the back, if that's what my thing is. If they attack, I'm going to fly over the top because I have the ability to fly over here to where the spellcaster is and land over here. Okay, as long as I've got 60 feet of fly speed, shouldn't be a problem. Yep, that's what I could do as my readied action. So your movement can be used to do a lot of different things. If you're already in the trees by a trunk and you say, I'm going to climb the tree if they look like they're going to attack, well, you can climb the tree as a readied action. So movement can do a lot of different things. Okay, now your action. I might decide, okay, if anybody comes up and attacks me or my allies, I'm going to attack them back. So that's my trigger. And so the goblins move forward and they attack, and this is what my readied action for my fighter is. I will attack back. I make one attack. Even if I have extra attack, I don't get 2 attacks, I get just the 1. That's how the readied action works, unfortunately. Okay, so I get to make 1 attack. Now, if I decide that's not what I want to do, instead my wizard is going to, if they try to attack, if those goblins try to attack, I'm going to cast a spell. I'm going to cast Firebolt right over here at that shaman, that orc shaman. If they try to attack us or any of my allies or me, I'm going to cast Firebolt. That's my readied action. So they do. They move forward. As soon as they start to attack your allies or you cast your Firebolt at the shaman at the back as your readied action. Okay? So you're holding your action to see what the enemy will do. What else can I do as a readied action? Well, if I was already in the bushes, I could potentially hold my action and say, I will take the hide action if they try to attack. So if they come in and try to attack any of my allies, I'm going to hide in the bushes. That's my readied action. Okay. Whenever you take a readied action, make sure you've done whatever other actions you want to do before you do so. You cannot move, you cannot use up your main action, but if you want to move first, use an interaction or a bonus action before you use your ready action. Make sure you do all of that first, because as soon as you ready your action, you can't do anything else on your turn. Okay. But I could try to do that if I wanted to. That's a possibility. What else can I do? Well, I might be able to ready an action to push an enemy away if they attack me. If this enemy comes at me, I'm going to push them down to the ground. That's my readied action. So I can ready a shove, the shove action. I could ready a grapple. If they try to attack me, I'm going to grapple them so they can't move away. Cool. You can do that. What else can you ready? What if I decide, okay, what I want to do is I'm going to pull a potion out of my bag, okay? I've got a potion on my belt. I'm going to drink that potion of healing if anybody tries to attack me as a readied action. I could ready an action to drink a potion. That's fine. They move up, they try to attack, I drink my potion. That's my main action used up, because to drink a potion of healing is going to be using your action and reaction. If I decide to drink the potion before that, I don't need to ready it, do I? Okay, I'm just using my main action. So there are a lot of different things you can do with it. But you just have to stipulate a trigger for it. One of the most complicated rules under the sun is the readied action because it has so many options. It's trying to do the work of so many different things. And in many respects, it's great that it is structured in such a way as that it sort of suggests to you that you have the ability to do pretty much anything you want with it. But it's also hard to negotiate with players what is going to be feasible. As long as you understand there's only one thing you can do out of the things that are available to you, then you'll be all right. Okay? All right. If you try to ready a spell to cast a spell as an action and that spell is not an action to cast, then you can't do it. If it takes an entire round to cast a spell or a couple of rounds to cast a spell, then you won't be able to do it. Yep. Okay. Now let's have a look at the chat here. When invisible, even if a creature can see invisible creatures, you get advantage still. Yes, yes. So when you are invisible, and I don't have an invisible creature miniature on me, unfortunately. I wish I did. If I did have one, I would grab it. So your point is, when invisible, even if a creature can see invisible creatures, you can get advantage still. I have never really agreed with this. I understand the concept behind it, that you're using invisibility. I would dispute that. I would never run the game that way. I know that's not necessarily what Jeremy Crawford has said, but Jeremy Crawford's idea of implementing the rules have been less than stellar. Okay, my suggestion to you is, I'm not going to give you a definitive answer on that one. I'm going to say, as a game master, dungeon master, do what you think makes the most sense. Players, suck it up. Yeah, suck it up and let them do their job. That's why they're there in the first place, to figure out how to deal with difficult situations. And hiding and invisibility and perception are one of the hardest things to adjudicate in a game. Now, if people don't like that, seriously, you just have to realize that as soon as you start being a game master, you'll understand. So, for example, in my home group, I run invisibility very different to how Simon runs invisibility when he's the game master. And then JP runs invisibility very different to how I do or Simon does. And then if we look at somebody like John runs it differently again. So we each have a slightly different approach to it, depending on our comfort level and how much complexity we want to try to process. I've already figured out that the rules cannot sort that out, so I do it a very particular way. I look at the description of what they're trying to do, what makes sense, and then decide on what mechanic I will use to adjudicate that. So one of the things that I guess I've said before, and I'll say it again, is that it's all very well if you are invisible, but if you're walking through deep snow, they don't need to worry about being able to hear you walking through the deep snow. They'll be able to see the huge footprints that have been left in the snow where you've been walking. So they'll know where you are. It does not matter if they cannot see you, because frankly, they know where your position is. So unless you're walking back through your tracks, which probably is going to be very difficult to do, but if in the middle of the battle you're invisible and you're standing in deep snow, I'm probably not going to let you have advantage against somebody else. Well, I might allow them to have advantage. I probably would allow somebody invisible in deep snow to have advantage against somebody else when they make an attack. But if somebody's trying to attack you and you're invisible and you're in deep snow, you're probably not going to wind up with them having disadvantage on the attack because they know where you are. But if you're invisible and you're standing on hard rock where there's no footprints being left behind and they really can't hear the noise that you're making because there's too much noise going on in the battle in the first place. Yeah, if they try to attack you, try to guess your location, they're probably not going to be able to figure out exactly where you are. Even if they make a perception check, it makes no sense, really. So that means that you will have disadvantage against them. And even if you figure out the correct position, you would have disadvantage. I'd do it that way. That's how I would adjudicate it, because that makes sense to me. But these are all things that we wind up having to. This is why there is a game master at the table to deal with all the stuff that's so complicated. Otherwise, why would you have a game master there in the first place? It's not necessarily the grandest job there is. Do you know what I mean? Some people like it, great, but it's not the grandest job out there. So yeah, that's my approach. Ready a spell. The spell is used even if the trigger doesn't occur. Yes, that's very true, Fred Hubber. If you're ready to use a spell, you have to prepare to lose that spell slot. You've used it up. It is just being held. It's not being released straight away. That's the thing to understand. So absolutely, I agree. And that's definitely raw. As raw, that's how it's supposed to work. Okay, so that's the ready to action. Let's move away from the ready to action. I'm doing this quickly because I'm trying to avoid having to answer more questions about invisibility, which I'm sure are going to come, which is fine. I always know that I'm going to get that sort of thing. This is complex combat, right? It's going to happen. Grapple. Let's do grapple. And that means we can then answer some of the questions that have been posed about what the heck happens with grapple. Let's do this. Okay. I'll drink of water. Okay. You decide that you want to grapple one of the goblins. And you want to stop them from moving around, which is fine. You probably won't want to do that when there's a lot of goblins around, but maybe you do in this case. Yep. So as your movement, you move up. I want to grapple. In this case, let's say our fighter has a strength modifier of 3. And if we're using athletics, because we're also trained in it, great, then we'd get a +2. If we're, say, level 1 or 2, something like that, we get a proficiency bonus. We're going to roll a 20-sided dice, try to grapple that goblin. I got a 9. Okay, so that is 3, 2, 5, 9, comes to 14. And I'm then going to compare it to another roll. So in this case, our goblin gets to choose either their strength modifier or their dex modifier. In this case, their dex modifier is a +2. It's better than their strength. So we'll be taking a 2 for our goblin. We'll just move them out of the way. Thank you very much. And I'll roll my 20-sided dice. This is a contest, remember. I rolled an 18. So 18 and 2 is 20. And I only got 14. So I'm not successful. Okay? They resist. I do not succeed in my grab or grapple. Now, if I rolled again and instead I got a smaller number, well, let's just select the number that's nice and small. So instead I got a 5. So 2 and a 5 would only be 7. Compare it to my 14. Well, I succeed. So now I can grab the goblin. Need to get greater than, never equal to. Okay? Less than and equal to is going to fail with a contest with a grapple. So what can I do now? Now that I've grappled my target. First of all, it says that I can move them half their speed. So as long as I haven't moved too far, I moved 2 squares out of my 6 squares that I have. So I've moved 10 feet and I have 20 feet of movement left. So that means that I can drag the goblin, not 20 feet, but half of that. So 10 feet. So I can drag them straight back. 1, 2. Back this way if I want to. I can drag them 10 feet. Maybe I decided actually that's not what I want to do. That direction's not the way I want to go. Instead, I want to drag them in a different direction. Instead, I want to drag them down here. Okay, so instead, when I'm doing this, I can go 1, 2. So I'm back here. So I'm dragging them to the right. Yeah. Can I drag them over here? Well, yes, I could. All right. I'm not dragging them yet, but I have changed the amount of movement that I have. Okay. So remember, if we're dealing with a completely new turn and you've got 30 feet of movement, then it's going to be a lot easier. But if you're doing it on the same turn, it's going to be harder. This does mean if I change my position, I'm capable of dragging them, but also I would be provoking attack of opportunity against this goblin. I could drag them down this way if I wanted to. I can drag them if I want to. I can drag them this way. Okay? As long as I got enough movement and I'm only using half my movement. I can drag them down this way if I want to. What I can't do is push them, but there's something behind them, so pushing them is probably not going to work. Yep. We're not shoving them, we are dragging them. So we can drag them to the left, straight back, to the right. That's not a problem. That's not a restriction on what we can do. They have to actually resist that grab. They have to actually decide to try to break free if they want to have control of where they move now. Does not stop a goblin from making an attack against the fighter or anybody else. Okay? It's still allowed to make an attack. There are penalties involved, but it can still do so. So that is the grab and dragging. For those of you who needed that demonstrated, I've done it. Okay? So let's have a look and see what questions have cropped up. My question about grappling is, what if I want to move a grappled creature without myself? So you want to move a grappled creature without moving myself. Oh, I see. All right. And Fred Hubbard said here, that's a shove or a pull. I don't think 5e has a pull rule, but a shove action exists. Okay, so here's the thing that I would say to you. Let's move this goblin over here so there's a bit of space. I would say to you that you could adjudicate as a game master that I will allow them to go left, right, backward, and move them, and I'm dragging them. You might even say you can do this. It looks more like a shove or a push, doesn't it? But you're going with them. The difference is with a shove specifically, and again, this requires a game master to make adjudications about what they think makes sense. What sort of suggests with a shove is you're pushing them, but you're not necessarily going with them. Yep. They go backward when you succeed on a shove, but with a grapple, you're always in contact. So that means that if you want to move them, you want to drag them, you say you want to drag them around you, but you're not actually moving. I would say that would be fine. You could say, oh, but that's pulling somebody. Okay? Is there really any difference? We're talking about semantics now, really. Is there that much of a difference between the concept of pulling and dragging? Okay? Since there isn't any mechanic, you use the most sensible mechanic that exists that will allow you to do this. And if you're wanting to drag them around this way rather than moving yourself, but you want to change their position, but not your own, as long as your character is within 5 feet, then I would say the grapple check is the most sensible thing to use. Does that make sense? I think now I've cottoned on to what you're trying to get at. Like anything, you cannot cover every single potential eventuality in a game, so you use the mechanics that are available that cover the things that make the most sense. So if that's what you're trying to do with your grapple, I would say yes. But a game master could also say, no, you can't do that. But I would say that's the most sensible rule to use, is use the grapple rule to allow you to position. Because you still have to stay in contact with them when you're grappling. You're not releasing them. It's not like they get to go around and over here, because you're not grabbing them anymore. You can't. Your arms aren't that long. Yeah. So that answers your question, Dirk. I use the grapple rules in the situation you're talking about. Okay, so I think the official rules has nothing about moving the grappled creature without moving yourself. Yeah, there's nothing really there. As I said, you just use what makes most sense, and the grapple rule is probably the easiest way. As long as you're staying within 5 feet, it should be fine. Yes, ropers can reel in enemies, absolutely. Yeah, that's Fred, you're absolutely right. Each dungeon master or game master should be adjudicating, or not should be, but can adjudicate differently because it's not raw. So yeah, I keep saying this. You've got to allow game masters to make decisions when the game rules don't really cover things. If you try to assume that the game rules can cover absolutely everything that you're ever going to do, you're going to run into problems. So that's grapple. Let's deal with shove. I think that's the next one on our cards. Let's deal with shove. Let's rub this out. And we'll move this up. So shove, also a special type of action that you can perform in the game. Really interesting in many respects because, let's get real, sometimes grabbing somebody doesn't seem like a very good idea, but shoving, pushing them onto the ground definitely seems like it's really, really useful. Yep. And I'll just move you out of the way. Okay, so how does a shove work? Well, we're going to make a athletics or strength check. So our fighter probably has a modifier for their strength of about 3, probably using a proficiency of 2 if they're level 1 or 2, and we roll a 20-sided dice. Okay, so we do that, and I get 5, 18, that is 23. So we're going to be taking that number for our fighter, okay, 23, and we're going to get our goblin, who is going to use their dexterity to resist it, to shove, and they're going to roll a 20-sided dice, and I got a 3 here, and a 2, that's only 5. So we get greater than their 5. So we succeed on our shove. What can we do with our shove? Well, there is a couple of things. We can shove them prone onto the ground. That's one of our choices. Okay, they are the right size. We can shove them back 1 square away from us to give us the space between them. Particularly if this area was covered in fire, that would be very helpful. Yep. So that's the shove. It's very simple. I know a lot of people say, but when you shove, you can only shove directly backward. Is it really that much of an issue to say, I can shove you this way? Or I can shove you that way? Yep. Can I shove you to here? It's still backward. It's just slightly to an angle. I don't think we necessarily need to worry too much about that. You're shoving them away from your square. So, yeah. I knew that would be a question people would pop up with, so that's why I'm mentioning it right now. Shove is really useful as a technique because, as I've said before, if you can shove somebody down and they're prone, if you have another attack as part of your action that you can make, your shove replaces only one of those attacks if you have 2 attacks, and you can potentially have advantage on your next attack. It's really, really useful when you need to have something hit, and whatever you're trying to hit is hard to hit. So, and you're relying on yourself and nobody else can sort of help you. What do you got here? A rule book that covers everything is a one something. I don't know what that is. Let's push it. 1 mile thick. Yeah. Everything that, if it does everything, it's probably 1 mile thick for sure. Absolutely. Okay, so that's shove. Okay, let's deal with the next one on our list, which is cover. And then we'll be doing death saving throws, which, oh God, here we go. That'll be a fun one. So I'll move all that out of the way. And we'll deal with cover. And put that up there. All right, so let's start off with what cover might look like, what we could use cover for, and then we'll go from there. If I can just get this to come up. Yep, cool. Wonderful. Thank you. All right, so cover. What does cover look like? What sort of cover can we use? And how does it work? Well, first off, it really depends on your position. Position on the battlefield is all important when it comes to cover. If you don't consider position on the battlefield important when you're dealing with cover, then yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So our first thing is half cover. If we're dealing with half cover, we get +2 to our armor class and +2 to any kind of dexterity saving throw. What can constitute as half cover? My wizard can use the fighter as half cover. They are medium-sized. This is a medium-sized creature. We can use them as half cover, particularly from anything that has a ranged weapon over here and they're firing a bow. So I now get +2 to my armor class and a dexterity saving throw if I have to make one. So useful. What else might do that? Well, if I have my wizard over here and the behind the statue, from these, since it's probably only covering about half my body potentially, okay, I'd have half cover from somebody firing a bow from here. So half cover might apply here. If I'm in the bushes over here, we might say that the Game Master says, well, that's half cover. So anybody who can see, has a good line of sight here, probably dealing with half cover, shooting the, even if you're not hiding in the bushes, but you're in the bushes, probably going to give you a +2 to your armor class or your dexterity saving throw. Half the body is covered. If we have something like an altar here, which comes up to about your waist, you could stand behind that and it would provide half cover from some of the individuals shooting at you. Okay, this individual, you could say, well, actually, is it really providing half cover? Well, it probably still does. There's probably half of your body still covered even from that angle. Yep. So half cover could be from something that's about half up your body. The altar could be used. So that's half cover. 3/4 cover in this environment is much harder to actually utilize because, one, it depends on how tall you are. How big are you? If you are something like a dwarf and you're a small size and very short and you stand behind this altar now, it might be 3/4 cover. Makes sense, right? Because only the 3/4 of your body covered by the altar. So 3/4 cover looks like this for a dwarf. They would get a +5 to the armor class, +5 to a dexterity saving throw for anybody trying to attack them. So who is going to offer that much? We might say that from this angle, this character here is probably only going to get half cover. But if we start moving around, it's going to change. Now, that might be half cover, might be 3/4. But somebody directly in front, we were definitely dealing with, if they're shooting at our dwarf, they're probably dealing with 3/4 cover now. That means that the dwarf gets +5 to their armor class or dexterity saving throw. That means that the orc trying to shoot a spell at the dwarf is going to be having to deal with that cover as well, 3/4 cover. Yep, that makes sense. That seems right. And that's just because of the height of that character. If we have a halfling, the halfling might be able to use the altar as 3/4 cover. A larger creature like this is going to find it very difficult to find something that provides that kind of cover. You might decide that if you're very deep into the forest here and you go back a bit more, instead of it being half cover, it's now classified as being 3/4 cover. So you get +5 or you get a +5 to a dexterity saving throw from any attacks because you're so far back in the foliage. Yep. You might decide that standing behind the statue is not actually half cover, it's actually covering about 3/4 of your body if you're medium size. Whether that be the wizard or it be the fighter. We now get 3/4 cover because 3/4 of their body's been covered up. So that's how that works. Now, the last one, and that is total cover. This is when you simply cannot see them. There aren't too many places within the battlefield right now where there is just total cover where you just simply can't see the target. You could do this a couple of ways though. Total cover is when you cannot see the target. You might decide, okay, I'm going to go up to the altar and then I'm going to drop prone. Anybody here, right in front of this, trying to shoot at the halfling, it would be classified as total cover because they can't see the halfling. Yep. Even the fighter might be able to move up here and drop prone and they can't be seen by the creatures directly in front of the altar with a ranged weapon. They're completely hidden. You might decide, okay, based on our position and where everybody is, if you stand way the heck over here, that's total cover. Nobody can actually see you behind this great huge pillar. You might decide, well, there's forest and a pillar here. I can stand here. If I move to this position, that provides me with total cover. Nobody can see me now. Okay, I am unseen. No part of me is showing up. That's total cover. Total cover is probably the only type of cover that a game always uses, even when you don't use cover rules. So, yeah, I'll just... There's my examples. That's how it works. Hello, Eddie Love. How are you? Let me just have a drink of water and I'll just go through this chat. So regarding shove, what happens when you shove someone over a ledge or into a hazard? Do they get to any save to avoid the hazard? Okay. Let's deal with a shove. Eddie, I'm gonna get to you in a second. So let's say that there. Okay, I've got nothing to sort of demonstrate this. Let's say that there is a fire brazier here, and you want to shove them back into that fire brazier. The dice is the fire brazier. Yep. So you force them back into the brazier. What happens if you shove them? You succeed on your shove. They fail on the shove. You succeed. What happens? Do they go over the ledge? Do they go into the hazard? Do they get a saving throw? It's very simple. The game master decides. That's it. The game master decides what is appropriate. Should it happen automatically? Should there be an opportunity for the goblin to make a saving throw? Or will they simply drop off the edge if there's a big, huge cliff face behind them? Are they going to be automatically pushed into the hazard and they will take fire damage? That's up to the game master. This is not a question that players can answer. It is only a question that game masters and dungeon masters have to decide how they want to have it operate. There is nothing in the rules that state you have to have a saving throw to avoid a hazard that you have been shoved into. But there's nothing in the rules that says that you can't have a saving throw to avoid the hazard. Okay, so it goes either way. Fred Hubber, I have had a creature shoved into a trap. Trigger the trap. Unfortunately, the trap was fireball. Well, fireball's going to probably hit everybody then, right? Okay. This was the days when fireball took up a volume, not just a radius. Okay, so that's a lot of area. Hey, bro, from the ever-trolling rogue, are you? Are you the ever-trolling rogue? I don't know. I'm not convinced. Are you really an ever-trolling rogue? Right, let's do death saving throws. We've done cover rules. Death saving throws, I'll cover that. And that'll be the last mechanic for today before I go to work. Death saving throw. Okay, let's grab that, move this over, put this up here. And yes, let's use a few different dice here to sort of represent what's going on. Switching over, back over to here. So, death saving throw. How does a death saving throw work? Well, death saving throws only come into play when your character's not dead, but they reach 0 hit points and they are dying. Otherwise, you wouldn't use it. So, we have our battlefield. They're engaged in a battle. There are goblins doing their thing. You've got wizards casting spells. You've got clerics trying to help out, whatever it might be, okay? This is what it kind of looks like right now. But unfortunately, the rogue is wound up getting smashed really badly, and they go down. They're not dead because they didn't take minus their maximum hit points, okay? If they had 10 hit points, maximum 10 hit points, and they took 20 points of damage from a single blow, not cumulative blows, not multiple blows, but from a single blow, and they went down to minus 10, and they had maximum of 10, they would be dead. Dead character. Don't worry about the saving throw. Okay, but if that's not the case, then they've got a death saving throw that they can do. And that takes place at the very beginning before they do anything on their turn, as I've said before. So you roll a 20-sided dice. There is no modifier unless there's some sort of special circumstances taking place. It's one of those sort of saving throws that doesn't have a modifier involved. So I roll a dice, and I roll a 17. So when I roll anything from a 10 to a 20, that's normally one success. So I have succeeded once on this. If I roll again, I got a 14. That's another success. That's 2 successes. I only need 3 successes to be successful so that I don't wind up dying and I'll stabilize. So I roll again. I rolled a 4. Unfortunately, if you roll a 9 to 1, it's usually one failure. Unless, of course, if I rolled a 1, I would get 2 failures. But in this case, I only get 1 failure, which is represented by the red dice. So that's the failure. Those are the successes. I roll again. And this time, my character gets a 9. So that's another failure. So instead of 1 failure, I have 2. It's getting very close now. I roll again on my next turn, and I get a 19. Another success. Okay, as I said, anything from a 10 to a 20 is a success. A 20 is a special type of success, which I'll talk about in a second. All right, so I succeed. I am no longer required to make death saving throws unless I take more damage. If I take more damage, that changes everything. Also, too, these all get reset. These don't apply anymore. As soon as I succeed, I reset that. It starts off at 0. I don't have a 0 on this dice, so I can't put a 0 on it. My successes and failures reset. That's the first thing to understand. If I were to roll a 1 on my death saving throw, okay, that would represent 2 failures. You don't want to roll 1s. 2 failures means it's very close to dying. If I roll a 20, which is a success but a special type of success, I no longer need to make any death saving throws because I now have 1 hit point. That's right, I have now 1 hit point. It's the beginning of my turn. I can stand up if I want. It's half my movement. I can make an attack against the goblin. Yep, all of that's possible. I can even use my bonus action to disengage with my rogue as a cunning action if I'm level 2. After my attack, if I wanted to. I could do that. All that's possible. Yep. Why is it there? It's really there to just ensure that players have something to do on their turn and to make the game a bit easier for people who are trying to get into the game. Death saving throws are just one of those things. I do not need to get all of my saving throws all at once, so if I don't have to get a failure on the first roll, then another one on the second roll, and then another one on the third roll. They do not need to be consecutive, but they accumulate. They have to be accumulated. Okay, that's what you're trying to do. All right, so that's the death saving throw. I guess the other question I suppose people will probably be asking is, what if I'm in an environment where I'm constantly taking ongoing damage? What if I'm on fire and I'm down here? The problem is if you're taking fire damage, and as long as that fire damage is, if you've got 10 is your maximum hit points, as long as the fire damage that you're taking every round is not 20 hit points, because that would push you to your minus your maximum hit points, and that would instantly kill you. If you're only taking, say, 1 point of damage or 2 points or 3 points, but you're on, that would count as 1 failure. You're taking damage, okay, 1 failure. Let's have a look at the chat. Okay, hello Milton, how are you doing? Milton Knowles, the Insane Witch King. My everything hurts, how are you guys? I am feeling very sore today myself, actually, Milton. The fact that I've got through here has been quite difficult. What do you got here, Eddie? What about the meat shield? Not just grapple, but use other NPCs or creatures to it. So, Eddie, you're going to have to explain what you mean by this a little bit more. What about the meat shield? Not just grapple, but using other NPCs or creatures to it. I'm not sure what you mean by this. I need the context. I remember Raw was saying something somewhere you can use a large creature for cover. Yes, you can use a large creature as cover. That's true. The cover rules do break down at a certain point. So for those, I don't have any miniatures the right size to demonstrate this, I don't think. Oh no, maybe I do. Do I have something large enough? I don't think I do. I don't think I've got... Oh no, I've got something that's a large size. So for example, and this is going back to cover rules, isn't it, really? So let's move the death saving rules for now. And Eddie, you'll clarify what you're trying to communicate. So, for example, if you're looking at a situation where you're trying to use cover and you've got a great, huge, large creature and you're hiding behind that creature, okay, yes, you can use a large creature as cover, just like a medium-sized creature. How much is the benefit of the goblin hiding behind that big, huge creature is going to be down to the game master, really. Another thing I suppose you might be saying is, what if we have a large creature and there's a small creature in front of them? Does the small creature provide cover to the large creature? So if I remember right, no, it doesn't. Even if you might say that's half cover though, or 3/4 cover. Even a medium-sized creature in front of a large creature, really, there's a small section, I think it's one sentence, it's not even in the right place to make it really clear what the heck is going on that talks about this. My advice to you is ignore the single sentence in the book that talks about this and do what makes sense to you. Okay? Because ultimately the rules there fall apart really badly. Dealing with a broken foot. Put a dragon between it, a full cover. Yeah, well, look, if you stand behind a large creature, you're probably going to be getting some cover. Will it be full cover? Not necessarily. Again, this is a decision a game master makes, not necessarily players. Okay, that's really all I can cover today. That's not intended to be punny there, but that's really all I can do today. I am out of time. What is happening tomorrow? Tomorrow is I'm going to review a free fan-made resource of Sonic the Hedgehog for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. And tomorrow I will be playing, and that will be taking place roughly about 10 o'clock for me in New Zealand, which is Los Angeles. That would be 3 p.m, sorry, Los Angeles for me, for Sonic the Hedgehog. It would be 4 p.m, for somebody in, Mountain Daylight Time, Chicago time, or Central Daylight Time. That would be 5 p.m, and it's 6 p.m, I believe, in Miami, Florida, for the Sonic the Hedgehog. But I will also be doing a live stream on Wally DM's channel. We'll be playing basic Dungeons & Dragons, or Back Me Dungeons & Dragons. This is Kill Bargle, or Kill Bagel. Castle Westermere, I think it's called. And I'll be playing with AJ Pickett and Mr. Welsh. We don't appear to have any... We had 2 more spots or slots available, and nobody seems to want them, so be it. It'll just be the 3 of us playing through. And yes, that will be taking place for me 12 p.m. For you in North America, it would be Los Angeles would be 5 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time, it would be 6 p.m. And Central Daylight Time, Chicago, is 7 p.m. And then Miami, Florida, is 8 p.m., I believe, for if you've still got your daylight time going. Hopefully that's the case. I have no idea. Okay, all right, okay. So that's everything I have for today. As I said, I'll do one more of these for Dungeons and Dragons 5e next week on Magic, and that'll be it. Yeah, we might all die. We were expecting to. It's all good. We may make extra characters. I'm not worried. You shouldn't be. Anyway, a huge thank you to everybody who's been watching and listening and taking part in the polls. I want to say thank you to all of my patrons who support me on Patreon so I can run this program every week. Same time, same day, we do game mechanics, and today it's been combat mechanics for 5e. I want to thank Fred Hubber, Eddie Love. I believe we had Milton in here. Dirt provided some very interesting questions. Pale Rider, I appreciate all of you and your comments. Satori also put in some interesting questions to answer for today. And yeah, I look forward to doing this all again next week with a bit of demo. We also had Big Kid. Almost forgot about Big Kid as well. So wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, the night, or the wee early morning, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. And hey, till next time, Keep rolling those 20s.